Hey there, my little old Kubota has got a problem. This back tire here was wobbling. I've already backed the nut off, but anyways, got lots of play in there. Engine 13/16 socket does the job. There's a spacer behind here. Spacer came out. I wiggled and jiggled and got the hub off. Hub's pretty chewed up on the back side. And the bearing is gone. So I'm going to have to rebuild my rear axle assembly on the passenger side. Lug nuts are 11/16 or 17, whichever you want to call them. I got the transmission resting on a couple wooden blocks. Also, you'll see a tire up underneath there. Sometimes I'll just shove a tire up underneath there or both tires, just to catch it in case something falls. I need to pull these bolts out of here and drop the axle down. And I have to play with the dry shaft and work it out at the same time. Hit the studs and nuts with PB Blaster. That's what I like to use the most. And they're 14mm, at least the jam nut is. I'm not down to the main nut yet. Okay, after the jam nut's off, the other nuts are 15. So I'm going to use a 15 with a wobble. I'm going to try to use my impact to take them off. I'm going to put the hardest one to get to, I'm going to try to take it off first. That way I'm not stuck with the axle that's vicariously hanging at some crazy position and I'm fighting with the hardest bolt to get to. So I don't hardly ever use my impact anymore. I don't use none of my tools anymore. That was easy enough. I'll work my way through the... Okay, I'm going to leave that one a little bit loose. Probably should leave them all a little bit on. Oops. One more. All right. So this baby wants to come out. So I'm going to go loose on the other side, take the jam nuts off, take the regular nuts loose, get it like this. Then I'm going to look at the axle themselves, the actual shafts, and see if it looks like they'll just slide right out. All I'm saying is this is how I'm doing it. And hey, worst thing that can happen is you learn from my mistakes. Look at that. It just wants to drop right on out there. Hopefully the spline will slip out. Probably not holding my tongue right. I'm going to turn the camera off, that way I can lie to you about how I got it out. Once I got the bottom of the boot loose, top and bottom, the driver's side fell right out. It's out. I'm assuming the passenger side will be out in a minute. The passenger side, this boot, when I pushed on my screwdriver to pry the boot loose, rust just started pouring out. And actually poured out for a long time. But what the hell? How can you get that rust? See that? It's out now. It's out. Still tons of rust in that damn boot. Okay, recap. 14mm are the jam nuts for the spring hanger bolts. 15mm are the nuts that hold the spring hangers on themselves. Loosen them up till they're real loose. Work both ends of the boot off. And once you got the boot where you can slide it up and down, then you can start lowering the axle, take the rest of the nuts off. The axle is really light, so that's the trick. It just slides right out. Now that I got the axle out, I gotta find a clean spot in the shop to set the axle so I can go ahead and take the bearings out. Just see if I can drive the axle out of here. I'm gonna be gentle. It's got enough of a shoulder here that I'm not gonna be boogering up the threads. But if I gotta wheel away at it, I'll probably stop and think of something else. Easy enough. U-joint is really good. Splines are not the prettiest. The bearing surfaces where the races ride, actually they look pretty good. This is the rusty spline that had all the rest of the boots. It's actually good. So I'll reuse it. There's two bearings, one on the inside, one on the outside. There's two seals, outside and inside. Okay, this is obviously the race of the bearing that came out. You can see the groove that the balls ran in. This in front of it, I'm not sure what that is yet. And then we've got a heavy shoulder here. This is the bearing that's still intact, the back bearing. And behind it's a seal. And there should have been a seal running in front of this bearing. Should have been a seal up in here. There's almost enough thickness in here for the bearing race right there. But on this side, it's not as heavy. Everything's kind of marred up too from the hub being bad and doing this number in there. So it all needs to come apart. Then I'm certain it'll come apart, and I'm certain I'll be able to put the new stuff in. So I can go ahead and order the seals if I want, but I'd really like to get this apart before I do. Okay. Everything's tight here, nothing wants to move. What I'm going to do, I'm going to lay a bead, weld a bead on the brace. And when I'm done, I'm going to let it cool down. It should shrink that race, and I should be able to move that race around inside of there. Run a bead on the race, nothing else. Don't weld nothing together. The race is shrinking. It wants to come out. I don't know if you see it moving in there or not. Oh yeah, it's real loose. I had this piece of scrap, this eye bolt. I found a nut to put on it, and I'm shoving it through the back bearings holes, and I can barely make contact with that race, but I'm knocking it out. You can see the gap in there, so it's going out. We'll keep wailing away at it. Good morning. I got my parts, and I talked to the Kubota dealer about how the inner bearing comes out. Everything I looked at on the net said that everything came out through the outside. This is the outer side right here, but in here we've got an inner bearing. But you see a shoulder right here. And my question was, is this a shoulder or is this a sleeve that's kind of pressed in there? But no, this is a shoulder machined into this housing. According to Kubota, the outer bearing comes out this way. The inner bearing goes out the opposite way. So I'll press this inner bearing and the seal behind the bearing out. What I've been doing for years is 35 years of mechanic, and I take a log book with me, a whole composition book. And whenever I have to buy seals from the equipment manufacturer, I write down that manufacturer's part number. Then when I open up the seal, I write down the number on the seal or the bearing or whatever part it is. Because in most cases, they're just generic. They're sold on a different part number, but they're generic. But just real quick on how it goes together. You got this seal. This is the inside seal. It will ride on this surface right here. There's a machine surface right next to it, and that's where the bearing presses on. Then you'll have this spacer, and this spacer is pretty much the same height or thickness as this machine race. And that goes, that'll ride in here. Then this bearing will ride on this machine surface. And then this outer seal will ride on a machine surface on the hub. So anyways, this is how they go. Seal and this seal and bearing need to go out this way through the hub, and this bearing and seal need to go out this way through the hub. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a wire brush and clean this scale and rust off this shaft, so when I do reinstall the axle, this shaft will float real good inside of its mating splines. If not, it could put a load on everything and possibly crack the aluminum housing for the transmissions. I'm going to try to put the inside bearing on the shaft along with the spacer and the seal. Now push it in from the bottom, put the nut on it and draw it tight, and that should pull the bearing into place. Give it a little persuasion from the bottom. Sounds real good. Doesn't have a hard thud, so I know she's moving along. Hear the thud change? It bottomed out. It was gentle. I don't think I've done any damage to the splines down here. Oh, no, it's fine. It's ready for its hub. In all honesty, the hub could be replaced, but I'm not going to. We just tool around the branch with this thing. It's my wife's more than anything. She runs down, feeds the chickens, and we'll dress it up. Like I said, if it was a holding oil back, it definitely would be replaced because it's in really bad shape. I'll use my blunt chisel and go around the outside of the seal, set it in place. Oh yeah, beautiful. It's there. I've got a spacer and then a lock washer and a castle nut, which is also in poor shape. And then she's ready to go back under the machine. Hole lined up. I just got the axle sitting on blocks, so I gotta keep moving it up until my axle splines start to get to where they're about ready to go into each other. If you look inside here, you got these valleys and ridges. You got an extra wide valley that is normally for a master spline, one really wide spline. What I am finding is this spline here, which is it's where there was no spline basically. Big old rusty spot, there it is. This spline right here is full of rust, this valley. So that obviously went into the extra wide valley on the female part. So I have to line those two up. If not, it will be held to get that to go in one of the peaks to go in that rusty spot. So that's what I'll line up on the way, and I need to shove the boot on here. The axle's in place. It's just hanging loosely. The bolts aren't tightened yet, but it's quite simple to put in. All I did was lift it up, set it on some blocks, and just pick up a little bit more, slide more blocks underneath it. The splines went in real easy, real easy. I just shoved the boot up on the upper part of the shaft, which is the female spline. And once that male spline got in the right spot on the housing so I could turn up far enough, it popped right in. I'm not going to swear that my rusty valley on that male spline is in the master spline on the female side, because by the time I'm wiggling, jiggling, moving everything, and I can't see it, but it's moving really good. So my only advice there would be make sure you clean that valley out real good. So if it winds up being clocked different, it won't create a bind as your axle moves up and down on the spring. I'll get some wire ties and tie my boots into place. Then I'll finish buttoning her up and this job will be done. Thanks for watching. And remember, if you love life and learning new things, go aimless.com.